Good morning, Andrew. How are you doing today?
Good morning, Errol. I'm good. How are you?
Fantastic. First of all, I didn't really understand the journey of food until the lockdown, and I started using my own kitchen instead of borrowing everybody else's habits and desires to bring food to life. This book really opens up my eyes to start studying the path, understanding the path, and then delivering it.
Thank you very much for that. That was very much the intention of the book. The promise of the book, it's not written anywhere in the book or on the flap copy, but the promise of the book to me is that if you read this book, you will never look at a restaurant meal the same way again, both logistically, but also I profile in great detail the way that we're used to only seeing the star, the chef or the owner profiled, all of the different workers who make it possible for you to enjoy a restaurant meal.
My Beatles moment with food was actually on the Pacific Coast Highway when you broke free of the ocean and you went into the land of California, and all of a sudden there was all that food that was headed to my grocery store. That changed my life.
That's so interesting to hear you say that. Yeah, I mean, you go to a restaurant, you order from a server. Even if there's an open kitchen, usually what's going on is out of sight or below the pass or the counter where the chef is standing. But you order a dish, and then 20 minutes later, this thing shows up on a plate. But if you rewind and follow it out of the restaurant back onto the multiple delivery trucks that brought it there, out to the farms and fields and bodies of water, to your point, from which this food comes, it is a mind-boggling web of people and effort that come together for even the most elemental dish. The dish at the center of this book is a very simple dish. It's a strip loin with a red wine reduction and half of a brandy wine tomato and some sorrel. That is the dish. And when I tell people about the book, that I spend the book just dissecting a dish and all the people who make it happen, the most frequent first question I get is, right? And I say just one. I say just one dish, and people are like, wait, you wrote a whole book about one dish? Mm-hmm. And once they read it, they get it. I mean, this book could have easily been 100 pages longer, but there would have been some redundancies that came into play, and I didn't want people to start.
In the book, the dish there's almost a mystery to it, and you're sitting there reading it, and you're going, oh my God, where's he going to go? How's he going to take this? How are we going to get to where we need to go?
Thank you for that. Yeah, well, and I think that's in two ways. One is, as I say, the main purpose of the book and the workers, and in the restaurant, that's everybody from the dishwasher to the cooks to the chefs to the server. And then beyond the restaurant, it's the farmers, it's the field workers, mm-hmm. It's the delivery truck drivers. But we do follow within the restaurant the chain of events that leads to a dish making it to your plate. We follow that in great detail, and each one of those is a chance for human error or something to go wrong or to become overwhelmed. But then in the field, all kinds of things can go wrong. There's a moment that seems very small where the truck driver that I spend a day with realizes he's short one box of corn. All of a sudden takes up 10, 15 minutes of his time as he calls the farm to let them know, and then he finds where someone else from the farm is running a farmer's market stand for them that day, and he arranges to come to a handoff, and he takes one of their boxes, and then that changes the sequence of his deliveries for the day. It is a constant improvisation to just deal with all, and none of this, by the way, speaks to incompetence or carelessness. There's an awful lot going on. There's a lot of moving parts, and that creates a need for people to be incredibly calm under pressure and very nimble in the moment.
Did anybody along the way ever look at you and say, are you from Undercover Boss? Because you're asking me questions that is going to help someone in the future, and only an undercover boss would ask these questions.
Oh, gosh. No. Everybody, I have to say, everybody was pretty open. I do speak to two people in the book who have immigrant stories. Wow. And whenever I've done that in the past, been a slight hesitancy because that is such a sensitive topic, especially in the last several years in this country. And I do think, and none of these people spoke English. Well, one spoke it just not super fluently, and the other one I had to use a translator. I also am lucky in that I grew up in Miami, Florida, with a Cuban stepmother, so I speak a little Spanish. But just explaining, I'm writing a book. I'm profiling all these people. I want to interview you. I'm going to ask you about, and these are both documented workers now, but I'm going to ask you about how you got to this country and all that. You could see that there was a little bit of a hesitancy. I don't know that I would call it a suspicion, because I was there with the blessing of their employers. But there was definitely a little bit of hesitancy and a little vibe, but that dissolved pretty quickly.
But what's really interesting about this is that you're showcasing the real stars of the plate, because how many people actually go out there and talk to real people who are getting their hands as dirty as humanly possible, doing what they do in the fields, and you've got their story. You're documenting a piece of Americana.
I really appreciate that. I mean, that was really... It wasn't until I'd already done all the interviews that I'd even decided I was going to write about the logistics of a dinner service and the detail that I do. The main purpose of the book was for people to start to think about, to get to know, and get to appreciate both, these workers who I think most people don't give a thought to. There are certain jobs I think people probably don't even know exist. But then also, just to appreciate the work, to appreciate the cost of employing all of these people. I mean, everything on this plate that I write about in the book requires, in most cases, not all, but in many cases, dozens of people to tend it in the field, to pick it, to box it, to drive it, to handle the business of a farm. And that's every single ingredient. And I think not only do people not recognize that, but they also, it's a whole different subject. They don't factor that into if they ever complain about the cost of a restaurant meal. Restaurant meals are actually, by and large, in this country, underpriced. They should cost more for the restaurant to have a comfortable financial existence. And I don't mean lavish. I just mean comfortable. But restaurateurs are so afraid of causing sticker shock amongst their guests that they run on very tight margins, and a big reason for that is people who grow food in an ethical manner are spending more to do it. That costs the restaurants more. They all believe in what they're doing, but they're terrified of charging what it really should cost because very often they're in competition with restaurants who get all of their food from some national food company. They're getting like everything they use off of maybe trucks from two different companies, not from farms that are driving distance from the restaurant.
Man, you bring up a truth there, because we just had a restaurant in Charlotte here. Their whole entire philosophy was from the field to the restaurant, to the table. And they didn't last very long. And you just covered every reason why they had to close their doors because of the cost.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we all saw this, right? There was a big education at the beginning of the pandemic when restaurants had to close all of a sudden, and a lot of them never reopened. And people were reading articles that explained, a lot of these restaurants don't have enough money in the bank to cover payroll, even for 1 week,
right,
if they're not generating revenue. And they're not doing that because they want to live on the edge like that. They are doing that because they're afraid of charging what they should. The rate of menu pricing, not costing behind the scenes, but what we pay for a meal in a restaurant has tracked well behind the rate of inflation for the last probably 2 decades in the United States. And the reason for that is the restaurateurs, the chefs, are very afraid of alienating their clientele. And what it's resulted in, and it's for all understandable reasons, but I think the industry has created a bit of a monster for itself by kicking that pricing can down the road. And this has all kinds of ripple effects. This affects whether a restaurant can offer health insurance to its people. And very often, there's this misconception that owner-operators, not that there aren't unsavory ones out there who are very selfish and don't care about their staff. But by and large, the owner operator of a restaurant often doesn't know what they're going to make for the year until they hit the promised land of the holiday season and start booking parties. And they're full up every night of the week, and that'll determine what kind of a distribution they can take at the end of the year. But very often, the owner operator is the last person to know what their true salary is going to be for a calendar year until they reach December 31st.
I'll tell you what, where you moved me in this book, The Dish, is when, because I started thinking about the cost, because I'll go out and I'll buy a $900 or $1,000 smartphone, but I'll bitch and complain about a $25 or $30 steak. And this book opened up my eyes going, do you know what went into the steak? Do you know what went into the spices, to grow the spices, to make sure that everything was beautiful on this plate? And you this is such an eye-opening book.
Thank you. I mean, it was for me too. Not that I didn't know about all of these pieces in isolation, but as I say at the very end of my introduction to the book, I say it was an adventure and an education for me. And I've been covering this industry for 25 years. I mean, I've spent thousands of hours observing in restaurant kitchens and interviewing chefs and becoming friends with people I didn't have an occasion to interview before, but who I did in this book. The workers who are on the front lines in the trenches, doing the dirty work and the real hard physical work. I spent a day in this book with a wonderful guy named Mark Hoffmeister, who is a delivery. I've stopped referring to him as a delivery truck driver. I now refer to him as a delivery professional.
Yeah.
But what he does, what this one person from just one farm goes through, and what every truck driver you see in a major American city, just to park your truck for 10 minutes and make one delivery, I say in the book, it could be a reality show. I mean, it's a hostile environment. There is nowhere to park a truck in the city of Chicago. They're in New York. I will never again be upset when I live in New York when I'm driving and a truck is double parked. Yeah. Because they have no choice. If they don't do that, they can't get the food to the restaurant. And if you just think about 5 different farms, because I profile 5 farms in this restaurant, having to go through that process, forget growing it and taking, nurturing ingredients sometimes for a period of, 5 or 6 months, like as with the tomatoes in the book. Beyond that, just what it takes to get it to the restaurant. I mean, I would pay $10 just for that. Yeah. And then there's the restaurant side is one thing, but the farms, I spoke to a guy named John Templin, who has a farm in Michigan. And, they deliver every Wednesday, as most farms do in the Chicago area, at least. And no matter what the weather is on Tuesday, they have to be out picking from the field to fulfill the orders they have. Yeah. So, I mean, there could be a monsoon out there, and they will be out there, gathering what they need to do to make their deliveries. And John himself drives the truck. In addition to everything he does to run his farm, he makes those deliveries. Oh, man. So now, being from Montana, we had a challenge up there. It was always the farmers against the city slickers. And did you see that divided line when you were out there as well? It's because the city people do not understand the farmer's life, and sometimes they don't respect the farmer's life. Well, I think that's probably true. And as a New Yorker, I've heard a lot of comments that make me really angry. I mean, well before I wrote this book, I think there is a snobism very often in large cities toward people who live in rural areas. There is definitely a difference in culture. Absolutely. I just make glancing reference to it, but one of the places I went to is in Forest, Illinois. It's just 2 hours south of the city. But if you are a urbanite and you were blindfolded and you were deposited there, I mean, you wouldn't know if you were in Texas. You wouldn't know if you wouldn't know where you were. You could be anywhere in rural America. And it's a town of 2,000 people, so there's not a lot of stores. The politics, generally speaking, are different. I do mention in one point, I wrote this book in the summer of 21, and in Chicago, you saw masks.
Yep.
Still, you saw Biden-Harris signs in a lot of shop windows. And then, you drive to a lot of the places where these farms were located, and you wouldn't even know there was a pandemic going on. Any political yard signage or whatnot was for Trump. And I don't comment one way or the other on the politics of it, but it's an interest to your question. It is an interesting observation that people who lead very different lives, who have very different world outlooks, they're doing business together. Yeah. And these farmers and these chefs, I hasten to add, it is a very harmonious partnership. I mean, the restaurants love these farms. These farms love servicing these restaurants. There is a constant dialogue about what's coming next, that the restaurants can cook with. One of the reasons John Templin, who I just mentioned, who has Butternut Sustainable Farms, one of the reasons, in addition to it's a cost savings, that he makes deliveries personally to a lot of these restaurants. And, John is someone who services some of the best restaurants in Chicago. For foodies who may be listening, Grant Achatz, who's the chef of Alinea restaurant, which is a 3-star Michelin restaurant, basically monopolizes John's prime tomato supply in the summer. I mean, his tomatoes are literally famous among Chicago restaurants. But John makes those deliveries personally so that he has a couple of minutes when he brings the stuff in the door just to talk to the chefs, to get their feedback, to see how they're using the food, to get any requests they might have, to give them a heads up on what he may be short on in the coming weeks, or what maybe he tried to grow this season that's coming in good, so that they can start thinking about how to utilize it on the menus. I know this is a long answer, but I just have to add, I observe and report a menu ideation meeting. Each dish in that menu meeting commences with one of the chefs in the meeting going through the inventory list for what's going to be available from each of the local farms they try to support the following week, right? And that is how they plan their menus.
Wow. Dude, you got to come back to this show anytime in the future. And plus, I would love to either see this on the Travel Channel, the Food Channel, or even a podcast, because you have got stories that are just mind-blowing.
I really appreciate that. I will say there is somebody in Los Angeles trying to make your dream come true, and mine, because I would love to be able to profile, a different restaurant and all of its teams and all the farms that service it, across the country. Because a chef friend of mine read the book recently, and he said to me, "I wish you could do this, with every dish in the world," because they all have this kind of a web extending out from them.
Yep. Well, you be brilliant today, okay, Andrew?
I appreciate all the kind words. Thank you very much, Arrow.